The farmer said, "If you tame that bull, I'll give you my ranch." No one foresaw the outcome. The dust hung thick in the air as the massive Brahman bull pawed at the ground, his cream-colored hide glistening with sweat under the relentless Queensland sun. His name was Titan, and he'd earned that name through 5 years of being absolutely untamable. 3 stockmen had been hospitalized trying to break him, and old Bill Crawford had finally given up hope of ever using the animal for anything besides terrifying visitors to his property near Emerald. Jake Murphy stood outside the fence, his weathered hands gripping the wooden rail as he studied the beast. At 28, Jake had worked on cattle stations across Queensland and the Northern Territory, earning a reputation as someone who could handle difficult animals. But even he had to admit Titan was something else entirely. The bull stood nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder, with horns that curved upward like twin scimitars, each easily 70 centimeters long. "You're having a laugh, aren't you, Bill?" Jake said, turning to the old farmer beside him. "That's not a bull, mate. That's a bloody death sentence with horns." Bill Crawford chuckled, though there was no humor in it. He was 73 years old, his face carved with wrinkles from decades under the harsh Australian sun. His hands, gnarled from arthritis, rested on the fence beside Jake's. The old man had been running Crawford Station for 50 years, but lately everything had become too much. His wife had passed 2 years earlier, his children had moved to the cities, and the thought of dying alone on this land was starting to weigh on him. "I'm deadly serious, son," Bill replied, his voice carrying that distinctive central Queensland drawl. "You tame that bull, get him calm enough that my granddaughter Emma can pat him without getting trampled, and this whole property is yours. 2,000 hectares, the house, all the equipment, the lot." Jake turned to look at the old man properly, searching his face for any sign of a joke. But Bill's pale blue eyes were steady, serious as a heart attack. "Why would you do that? This place must be worth millions." Bill sighed, looking out across the property that had been his entire life. The homestead sat on a gentle rise about 1/2 kilometer away, a classic Queenslander home with a wraparound veranda and corrugated iron roof. Beyond it stretched paddocks of golden grass, dotted with cattle and bordered by ancient gum trees. "Because I'm tired, Jake, and because everyone else thinks that Bull should be destroyed. They reckon he's too dangerous, too wild, too far gone. But I raised him from a calf, and I know there's something special in him. If you can reach it, if you can show me that patience and understanding can win over violence and force, then you're the kind of bloke who deserves this land." Jake felt his heart racing. He'd been saving for years, dreaming of having his own place, but property prices had gone through the roof. Station hands like him were getting priced out of ever-owning land. This was an opportunity that would never come again. But it could also be the last opportunity he ever got, full stop, if Titan decided to introduce him to those horns. "How long do I have?" he asked. "Emma's coming for the school holidays in 6 weeks. That's your deadline." 6 weeks. 42 days to tame a bull that had hospitalized 3 experienced stockmen. Jake looked back at Titan, who was now staring directly at him, as if he understood exactly what was being discussed. The bull's dark eyes seemed to hold a challenge, a dare. "Right then," Jake said, extending his hand to Bill. "You've got yourself a deal, old man." They shook hands, and Jake could feel the tremor in Bill's grip, the weakness that age and illness had brought to what had once been iron-strong hands. The old farmer smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen on his face in months. "There's a condition, though," Bill added. "You can't use any of the old methods. No roping him down and breaking his spirit, no starving him into submission, no drugs, no tricks. You've got to do it proper, with patience and respect. That's the whole point." Jake nodded slowly. That made it even harder, but also more meaningful. This wasn't about dominating the animal through force. It was about actually connecting with him, understanding him, earning his trust. "Fair enough. When do I start?" "How about now? I've set up the old workers' quarters for you. 3 meals a day included. and you can use any of the facilities on the property. But Jake, I need to warn you, he's hurt 3 good men. If you change your mind, there's no shame in it. I won't change my mind." That evening, after moving his few possessions into the small but comfortable cottage near the main homestead, Jake sat on the veranda watching Titan in the distance. The bull had his own large paddock, separated from the other cattle. Bill had explained that Titan had become aggressive toward the other bulls, challenging them constantly, so they'd had to isolate him. Bill's daughter, Sarah, brought Jake a cold beer and sat down in the chair beside him. She was in her early 40s, visiting from Brisbane to check on her father. Her face showed the worry she felt about the old man's declining health. "Dad told me about your arrangement," she said, her tone neutral. "I think you're either very brave or very stupid." "Probably a bit of both," Jake admitted with a grin. "That bull killed my daughter's pony last year, just charged the fence and smashed through it. Emma was riding nearby and saw the whole thing. Dad feels terrible about it, blames himself for not putting Titan down sooner." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't known about that. "He killed a pony." Jake's voice came out quieter than he'd intended. Sarah nodded, her expression grim. "Smashed through a post and rail fence like it was made of matchsticks. The pony didn't stand a chance. Emma's only 8. Jake, she had nightmares for months. That's why Dad's condition is what it is. If you can't get that bull calm enough for Emma to be safe around him, Dad won't give you the property. He'll have Titan destroyed and probably sell up to some corporate mob from Sydney." Jake took a long pull from his beer, feeling the weight of what he'd agreed to settle heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about taming a dangerous animal anymore. It was about healing a family, about proving that violence and fear didn't have to be the end of the story. "I'll do it," he said simply, "or I'll die trying." "That's what worries me," Sarah replied, but there was a hint of respect in her voice. The next morning, Jake woke before dawn. The kookaburras were already laughing in the gum trees, announcing the new day with their distinctive call. He made himself a strong coffee and walked out to Titan's paddock, carrying nothing but a small stool and his determination. Titan was standing in the far corner, already awake, watching Jake's approach with suspicion. The bull's massive head lowered slightly, his body language screaming aggression. Jake stopped about 50 meters away, set down his stool, and simply sat. He didn't try to approach. He didn't call out. He just sat there, drinking his coffee, as the sun began to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. This became the routine. Every morning for the first week, Jake would arrive before dawn, sit on his stool at the same spot, and simply exist in Titan's space. He'd bring a thermos of coffee, sometimes a book, and he'd just be there. Not threatening, not demanding, just present. Bill watched from the homestead veranda with binoculars, shaking his head. "He's just sitting there," Bill muttered to Sarah, who'd stayed on to keep an eye on both her father and this crazy young bloke who thought he could tame the untamable. "Maybe that's the point, Dad. All those other blokes came in trying to dominate Titan. Jake's doing the opposite." By the end of the first week, Titan had stopped pawing the ground when Jake arrived. The bull still kept his distance, still watched with wary eyes, but the immediate aggression had faded to cautious curiosity. On day 8, Jake moved his stool 10 meters closer. Titan snorted and backed up, but he didn't charge. Jake started talking, not to Titan specifically, just talking out loud about his life, his dreams, his fears. He told stories about growing up on his uncle's small property near Toowoomba, about losing his parents in a car accident when he was 15, about the years of drifting from station to station, never quite finding a place to call home. "You and me aren't so different, mate," Jake said one morning, his voice carrying across the paddock. "Both of us just looking for somewhere we belong. Both of us scared of getting hurt, so we push everyone away first." Titan's ear flicked forward, the first sign that he might actually be listening. On day 12, Jake brought an apple. He took a bite himself first, showing it was safe, then cut pieces and tossed them gently onto the ground, nowhere near Titan. He left them there and went back to his stool. 2 hours later, after Jake had left, Bill watched through his binoculars as Titan cautiously approached the apple pieces and ate them. "He's making progress," Bill told Sarah that evening, and for the first time in months there was hope in his voice. The breakthrough came on day 19. Jake had moved his stool to within 20 meters of where Titan typically stood in the mornings. He was reading a book, stealing glances at the bull every few minutes when he heard movement. Titan was walking toward him, not charging, not aggressive, just walking with slow, deliberate steps. Jake's heart hammered in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He kept his eyes on his book, though he wasn't reading a single word. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to protect himself, but he stayed put. Titan came within 10 meters, then 8, then 5. Jake could hear the bull's breathing, could smell the earthy scent of him. Then Titan did something extraordinary. He lay down right there, 5 meters from Jake. The massive bull simply folded his legs and lay in the dust, watching the human who'd been invading his space for nearly 3 weeks. Jake carefully marked his page and set the book down. He looked directly at Titan for the first time in days. "G'day, mate," he said softly. "Took you long enough to come say hello?" Titan's tail swished, but he didn't move. They stayed like that for over an hour, man and bull, just existing in the same space without fear or aggression. When Jake finally stood to leave, moving slowly and deliberately, Titan didn't react. He just watched with those dark, intelligent eyes. That evening, the entire dynamic shifted. Jake started spending longer periods in the paddock. He'd bring his lunch and eat it there. He'd fix sections of fence while talking to Titan. The bull began following him around at a distance, curious now rather than hostile. By day 25, Titan was eating apples directly from Jake's hand. The first time it happened, Bill actually whooped from the veranda, startling Sarah, who'd been reading beside him. "I don't believe it," Bill said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's the same bull that put Jimmy Richards in hospital for 2 weeks. Jake's got a gift," Sarah admitted. "I've never seen anything like it." But Jake knew the real test was still to come. Getting Titan to accept him was one thing. Getting the bull calm enough for an 8-year-old girl to pat him safely was something else entirely, and he only had 3 weeks left. On day 30, Jake made the decision to enter Titan's personal space properly, not just sitting nearby or tossing food, but actually walking up to him, touching him. It was a calculated risk, but time was running out. Emma would arrive in 12 days, and Jake needed to be absolutely certain the bull was safe. He approached slowly that morning, his hands visible and empty. Titan watched him come, and for a moment the old wariness flashed in those dark eyes. The bull's muscles tensed, his head lowered slightly. Jake stopped immediately, reading the body language. "Easy, mate. Just me. You know me now, don't you?" He stood completely still, letting Titan process his presence. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 2 minutes, the bull relaxed. Jake took another step, then another. When he was within arm's reach, he extended his hand slowly, palm down, letting Titan sniff it. The bull's warm breath huffed across his skin. Then Jake did something that made Bill, watching from a distance, nearly drop his binoculars. He reached out and gently touched Titan's forehead, right between those massive horns. The bull didn't flinch, didn't rear back. He just stood there, accepting the touch. "Good boy," Jake murmured. "You're not so tough after all, are you? Just needed someone to understand you." Over the next few days, Jake spent hours with Titan, grooming him, checking his hooves, talking to him constantly. He discovered that the bull had a particularly sensitive spot behind his left ear that made his back leg twitch when scratched, much like a dog. He learned that Titan preferred carrots to apples, and that he had a habit of nudging Jake's shoulder gently when he wanted attention. But the real revelation came on day 34. Jake was sitting on the ground, his back against Titan's massive side, eating a sandwich for lunch. The bull was lying down, contentedly chewing his cud. Sarah had come out to watch, standing safely outside the fence, still not quite believing what she was seeing. "Dad's crying," she called out. "He's up at the house, watching through the binoculars, and he's actually crying." Jake smiled but didn't move. He understood. Bill had raised this bull from a calf, had seen the potential in him, and then watched helplessly as Titan became more and more aggressive, more dangerous. Everyone had told the old man to put the bull down, that he was a lost cause. But Bill had held on to hope, and now that hope was being validated. "Tell him to come down here," Jake called back. "I reckon Titan's ready for another visitor." 20 minutes later, Bill Crawford walked slowly across the paddock, using his walking stick for support. His steps were careful, measured, but there was determination in every movement. When he reached Jake and Titan, the old man's eyes were indeed red-rimmed, though he tried to hide it. Titan raised his massive head, looking at the old farmer. There was a moment of stillness, and then the bull made a sound, a low, gentle lowing that Jake had never heard before. Bill's weathered face crumpled, and he reached out with a trembling hand to touch the bull's nose. "There's my boy," Bill whispered. "I knew you were still in there. I knew it." They spent an hour there, the old man and the bull he'd raised, reconnecting after years of violence and fear had driven them apart. Jake stood back, giving them space, understanding that this moment was bigger than his challenge, bigger than winning property. This was about healing, redemption, proof that patience and love could overcome even the deepest wounds. That evening, over dinner at the homestead, Bill laid out the final test. "Emma arrives in a week. I've told her about what you've done, Jake, but she's still terrified. She has nightmares about Titan. Her psychologist says facing the fear might help, but it has to be her choice. You can't force it." "I understand," Jake replied. "We'll take it at her pace. If she can pat him, really pat him without being terrified, then the property is yours. I'll have the lawyers draw up the papers tomorrow. But Jake, I need to know you'll look after this place properly, that you'll respect the land, the animals, the history here." "I will, Bill, I promise you that." The week passed in a blur of preparation. Jake worked with Titan every day, introducing new elements, different people. Sarah was the first to pat the bull, nervous but trusting Jake's assurances. Then some of the neighboring station hands came by, wanting to see the miracle for themselves. Titan accepted them all, with varying degrees of patience, though he clearly preferred Jake's company. The day Emma arrived, the property was buzzing with nervous energy. Bill had invited several family members and friends, wanting witnesses to this moment. The little girl stepped out of her mother's car, her brown hair in pigtails, her face showing a mixture of excitement and fear. Jake had set everything up carefully. Titan was in a smaller yard, freshly groomed, looking as calm and peaceful as Jake had ever seen him. Emma held her mother's hand tightly as they walked toward the fence. "That's him?" she asked in a small voice. "That's Titan." "That's him, sweetheart," Bill said, kneeling down beside his granddaughter despite the pain it caused his old knees. "But he's different now. Jake here has been teaching him to be gentle." Emma looked up at Jake with wide, evaluating eyes that reminded him painfully of her grandfather. "How did you do it? Everyone said he was mean." Jake crouched down to her level. "Well, Emma, I learned that Titan wasn't mean. He was scared, just like you're scared of him right now. When we're scared, sometimes we act tough to protect ourselves. I showed him he didn't need to be scared anymore, and he showed me he could be gentle. Is he still scary? Sometimes. He's still big and strong, and we have to respect that. But scary and dangerous are different things. He's not dangerous anymore, not to people who treat him with kindness." Emma thought about this for a long moment. Then she surprised everyone by asking a question that showed wisdom beyond her years. "Does he remember what he did? To Buttons?" The yard went silent. Buttons had been her pony's name. Jake felt his throat tighten. He glanced at Bill, who had tears forming in his eyes again. This was the question that mattered, the wound that needed healing more than any property deal. "I don't know if he remembers it the way you do, Emma," Jake said honestly, "but I think he knows he hurt you. Animals are smarter than people give them credit for. They feel things, and I reckon Titan feels sorry in his own way." Emma studied the bull through the fence rails. Titan was standing calmly, but his attention was focused entirely on this small human who smelled like fear and grief. The bull took a step closer to the fence, and Emma instinctively stepped back, pressing against her mother's legs. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah said softly. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do." But Jake could see something shifting in the little girl's expression. She was fighting her fear, wrestling with it the way he'd watched Titan wrestle with his own demons over the past 6 weeks. "Can I ask him something?" Emma said quietly. "Course you can, love," Bill replied. "Ask away." Emma took a tiny step toward the fence, though her hand remained firmly gripped in her mother's. "Titan." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you sorry about Buttons? What happened next would be talked about in the district for years to come." Titan lowered his massive head, that enormous skull with its dangerous horns, until his nose was nearly touching the ground. It was a posture of submission, of peace, that bulls almost never showed. He held it there for several seconds, then lifted his head and made that same gentle lowing sound he'd made for Bill. Emma's eyes went wide. "He said yes. He said he's sorry." "He did, didn't he?" Jake said, his own voice rough with emotion. The little girl looked up at her mother, then at her grandfather, then back at Jake. "Will you come with me if I want to pat him?" "Every step of the way, Emma, I promise." Jake opened the gate to the yard and held out his hand. Emma hesitated for just a moment, then released her mother's hand and took Jake's instead. Her small fingers felt impossibly fragile in his work-roughened palm. Together, they walked toward Titan. The bull remained perfectly still, as if he understood the importance of this moment. Jake led Emma slowly, letting her set the pace. When they were about 2 meters away, she stopped. "I'm scared," she admitted. "That's okay. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing the right thing even when you are scared." "Is this the right thing?" Jake thought carefully about his answer. "I think forgiveness usually is. Not because the other person deserves it, but because holding on to hurt and anger makes us prisoners of the past. Your grandpa taught me that in a way, by giving Titan another chance." Emma looked up at him with those wise old eyes in her young face. "Did Grandpa give you another chance too?" Jake felt his breath catch. This kid was sharp. "Yeah, he did. I've made mistakes in my life, Emma. I've been angry and lost and hurt people without meaning to. Your grandpa saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, just like he saw something in Titan." Emma nodded slowly, processing this. Then she took another step forward, then another. Jake walked with her until they were within arm's reach of Titan. The bull's breathing was slow and steady, his eyes gentle. "Put your hand on mine," Jake said softly. "We'll pat him together first." Emma placed her small hand on top of Jake's larger one. Together, they reached out and touched Titan's forehead, right between his eyes. The bull's hide was warm, the hair coarser than Emma had expected. She could feel the solidness of him, the strength, but also something else, a gentleness that she hadn't believed possible. "He's soft," she whispered. "He is, isn't he?" They stood there for several minutes, girl and man and bull, connected in a moment of profound healing. Then Emma did something that made every adult watching catch their breath. She pulled her hand away from Jake's and reached up on her own, patting Titan's massive head with her tiny palm. "I forgive you, Titan," she said clearly. "I forgive you for Buttons, and I'm sorry people were mean to you and made you scared." Titan lowered his head further, gently nuzzling Emma's shoulder in a gesture so tender that Sarah started crying openly. Bill was leaning heavily on his walking stick, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. Even some of the tough station hands watching had to turn away and clear their throats. Emma wrapped her small arms around as much of Titan's neck as she could reach, hugging him. The bull stood perfectly still, accepting the embrace, giving her this moment of closure and new beginning. When Emma finally stepped back, she was smiling. Not just a small smile, but a genuine, bright smile that lit up her whole face. "Can I come visit him every holidays, Grandpa?" Bill could barely speak. "Course you can, sweetheart. Any time you want." Emma turned to Jake. "Will you still be here, to help me learn to take care of him properly?" Jake looked at Bill, who nodded through his tears. "I'll be here, Emma. This is my home now." Later that evening, after the documents had been signed and witnessed, after the family had celebrated with a barbecue that brought together people from stations across the district, Jake sat on the veranda of what was now his homestead. Bill sat beside him, 2 beers on the small table between them. I never thought you'd actually do it," Bill admitted. "I mean, I hoped, but I didn't think it was possible. To be honest, mate, there were days I didn't think so either. What was the secret? How'd you reach him when no one else could?" Jake thought about it, watching the sun set over land that was now his responsibility, his legacy. "I reckon it wasn't about reaching him. It was about letting him reach me. Everyone before tried to break Titan, to dominate him, to force him to submit. I just tried to understand him, to see the world through his eyes, to give him what he needed instead of demanding what I wanted." Bill nodded slowly. "That's a good philosophy for more than just handling bulls." "Yeah, I'm learning that." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In the distance, they could hear Titan's contented lowing as he settled in for the night. "Jake?" "Yeah, Bill? Thank you, not just for taming him, but for showing an old man that it's never too late for redemption, for any of us." Jake raised his beer bottle in a silent toast, and Bill clinked his against it. In 6 weeks, Jake had gained more than property. He'd found a home, a purpose, and proof that patience, understanding, and compassion could transform even the most damaged souls. Neither Titan, nor Jake, nor Bill, nor Emma would ever be quite the same again. They'd all been healed by choosing connection over fear, forgiveness over anger, hope over despair. And that was an outcome nobody had foreseen, but everyone would remember.